Hello friends, welcome to the Point. In today's session, let's discuss about the state legislature. So the state legislature, it occupies a central position in the political system of a state, and Articles 168 to Articles 212 in Part 6 of our Constitution, it deals with the organization, composition, duration, officers, procedures, privileges, powers of the state legislature. Organization of state legislature. So there is no uniformity in the organization of state legislature. Most of the states are unicameral in nature, and while others are bicameral system. At present, only 6 states have 2 houses, that is bicameral system. They are Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Maharashtra and Karnataka, and all other remaining states have unicameral system. Here the state legislature, it consists of governor and the legislative assembly. In the states that is having bicameral system, the state legislature consists of governor, legislative council and the legislative assembly. The legislative council, which is also called as Vidhan Parishad, it is the upper house, that is the second chamber or the house of elders, while the legislative assembly, which is called as Vidhan Sabha, is said to be the lower house, that is the first chamber or the popular house. Unicameral system and bicameral system, these are said to be the 2 types of state legislature. Composition of 2 houses. Let's discuss about the composition of legislative assembly. The strength in the assembly. The legislative assembly, it consists of representatives who are directly elected by the people on the basis of universal adult franchise, and its maximum strength is fixed at 500 and minimum strength is fixed at 60. It means that its strength varies from 60 to 500 depending on the population size of the state. So when it comes to the case of Arunachal Pradesh, Sikkim and Goa, the minimum number is fixed at 30. And in the case of Mizoram, the minimum members are 40, and in Nagaland it is fixed to 46. And some members of the legislative assemblies in the Sikkim and Nagaland, they are also elected indirectly. Nominated member. The governor can nominate 1 member from the Anglo-Indian community if the community is not adequately represented in the assembly. Originally this provision, it was to operate only for 10 years, that is up to 1960, but this duration was extended continuously since then by 10 years each time, and at present under 95th Amendment Act 2009, this is to last until 2020. Territorial constituencies. For the purpose of holding direct elections to the assembly, each state, it is divided into territorial constituencies, and the demarcation of these constituencies is done in the manner of ratio between the population of each constituency and the number of seats allotted to it. Readjustment after each census. After each census, a readjustment is to be made in the total number of seats in the assembly of each state and the division of each state into territorial constituencies. And for this purpose, the Parliament is empowered to determine the authority and manner in which it is to be made. Reservation of seats for SCs and STs, that is for scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. The Constitution, it provided for the reservation of seats for the scheduled caste and scheduled tribes in the assembly of each state on the basis of population ratios, and originally this reservation was to operate for 10 years, but this duration has been extended continuously since then by 10 years each time, and under the 95th Constitutional Amendment Act 2009, this reservation is to last until 2020. Composition of council. Strength of the council. And like the members of Legislative Assembly, the members of the Legislative Council, they are indirectly elected, and the maximum strength of the council is fixed at 1/3 of the total strength of the assembly. 1/3 of the total strength of the Legislative Assembly, and the minimum strength is fixed to 40. It means that the size of the council, the size of the Legislative Council, it depends on the size of the assembly of the concerned state. Why is that the strength of the Legislative Council depends on Legislative Assembly? Why? Because this is to ensure the predominance of the directly elected house, that is the Legislative Assembly, in the legislative affairs of the state. Though our constitution has fixed the maximum and minimum limits, the actual strength of the council, it is fixed by our parliament. Manner of election. Of the total number of members of a legislative council, 1/3 members, they are elected by the members of local bodies in the state like municipalities, district boards and etc. And 1/12 they are elected by the graduates of 3 years standing and residing within the state, and 1/12 they are elected by the teachers of 3 years standing in the state, not lower in standard than secondary school, and 1/3 members, they are elected by the member of Legislative Assembly of the state and from among the members who are not the members of the assembly, and the remaining, they are nominated by the governor from among the persons who have a special knowledge or who have a special practical experience on the subjects like literature, science, art, cooperative movement and social service. In brief, we can say that 5/6 of the members of the Legislative Council, they are indirectly elected, and 1/6 the members, they are nominated by the governor. Duration of 2 houses. First, let's discuss about the duration of Legislative Assembly. Like Lok Sabha, the Legislative Assembly is not a continuing chamber. Its normal term is 5 years from the date of its first meeting after the general election. Once the term of 5 years get expired, then automatically Legislative Assembly gets dissolved. And apart from this, the governor is authorized to dissolve the assembly at any time. We can say even before the completion of 5 years term, and a fresh elections has to be conducted. The term of the assembly, it can be extended during the period of national emergency by a law of parliament for 1 year at a time, and this extension, it cannot continue beyond a period of 6 months after the emergency has been ceased to operate. This means that the assembly should be re-elected within 6 months after the revocation of emergency. Duration of Legislative Council. Similar to Rajya Sabha, the Legislative Council, it is a continuing chamber. We can say that this is a permanent body and it is not a subject to dissolution. But 1/3 of Legislative Council members, they retire on the expiration of every second year, so that a member continues as such of 6 years. The vacant seats, they are filled up by fresh elections and nominations by governor at the beginning of every 3rd year. That means every 3rd year, Legislative Council will have an election or a nomination by the governor. The retiring members of the Legislative Council, they are also eligible for re-election and re-nomination at any number of times. Membership of the state legislature. Qualifications. The Constitution has laid certain qualifications for a person who is to be chosen as a member of state legislature. The qualifications are, he should be a citizen of India and he must have completed 25 years of age and he must possess other qualifications that is prescribed by the Assembly. The Parliament has laid down some other additional qualifications in the Representation of People's Act 1951. Here, a person elected to the Legislative Council, he must be an elector for an assembly constituency in the concerned state, and he is to be qualified for the governor's nomination. He must be a resident in the concerned state, and the member of the state legislature must be a member of scheduled caste or scheduled tribe if he wants to contest a seat reserved for them. Disqualification of the member of state legislature. Under the Constitution, a person shall be disqualified for being chosen as a member for a legislative assembly or legislative council of a state if he holds any office of profit, or if he is of unsound mind and stands so declared by the government, and if he is an undischarged insolvent, and if he is not a citizen of India, or if he has voluntarily acquired the citizenship of other foreign countries. In such cases, he loses his position as a member of Legislative Assembly or Legislative Council. And according to the Parliament, it has prescribed a number of additional disqualifications in the Representation of People's Act 1951, and these are similar to those of Parliament, and they are: the person of Legislative Assembly or a Legislative Council, he must not have been found guilty of certain election offences, or he must not have been convicted for any offence which results in imprisonment for more than 2 years or 2 years. The person must not have failed to lodge an account of his election expenses within the given time. The member of Legislative Assembly or Council must not have any interest in government contract works or services, or he must not be a director or a managing agent, nor he must hold an office of profit in corporation in which the government has at least 25% share. That means, in any corporation where the government has 25% of share, there the person should not be a director or a managing agent. So if he is a director or managing agent, in that case, the member of the Legislative Assembly or a Legislative Council, that person, he loses his office. The member of the Legislative Assembly or Legislative Council must not have been dismissed from the government service for corruption or disloyalty to the state, and he must not have been convicted for promoting enmity between different groups or for the offence of bribery. He must not have been punished for preaching and practicing social crimes. Disqualification on the ground of defection. The Constitution also lays down that a person shall be disqualified for being a member of Legislative Assembly or Legislative Council if he is disqualified on the ground of defection under the provision of 10th schedule, and the question of disqualification under the 10th schedule, it is decided by the chairman in the case of Legislative Council, and the question of disqualification under the 10th schedule, it is decided by the speaker in case of Legislative Assembly and not by the governor. In 1992, the Supreme Court ruled that the decision of chairman or speaker in this regard is subject to judicial review. Oath or affirmation. Every member, whether he may belong to Legislative Assembly or Legislative Council, before taking his seat or before entering his office, his house, he must make an oath or affirmation before the governor or some other person who is appointed by the governor on behalf of him. In this oath, a member of the state legislature, he swears to bear a true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of India, and to uphold the sovereignty and integrity of India, and to faithfully discharge the duties of his office. Remember, unless a member takes the oath, he cannot vote and he cannot participate in the proceedings of the House. and he is not eligible to the privileges and immunities of the state legislature. Vacation of seats. When does a seat in the House of State Legislature falls vacant? Double membership, disqualification, resignation, absence, and other cases. And these are the cases where a member of the state legislature vacates his seat. In case of double membership, a person cannot be a member of both the houses of the state legislature at the same time. If a person is elected to both the houses, that is for the Legislative Assembly and Legislative Council at a time, and his seat in one of the house, it falls vacant as per the provisions of the law which is made by state legislature. Disqualification. If a member of the state legislature becomes subject to any one of the disqualification, then his seat becomes vacant in the house. Resignation. A member may resign his seat by writing to the chairman of Legislative Council or to the Speaker of Legislative Assembly, and at that time the seat falls vacant when the resignation is accepted. Absence. A House of the State Legislature can declare the seat of a member vacant if he is absent for too long, that is, if from all the meetings for a period of 60 days without the permission of the House. At that time the seat of the member falls vacant. And in other cases, like a member has to vacate his seat in either house of the state legislature if his election is declared void by the court, and if he is expelled by the house, or if he is elected to the office of president or vice president, and if he is appointed to the office of governor of the state. In all such cases, there falls a vacancy in the state legislature. Presiding office of state legislature. So each house of state legislature has its own presiding officer, and there is a speaker and a deputy speaker for legislative assembly, and a chairman and a deputy chairman for the legislative council. A panel of chairmen for the assembly and a panel of vice chairmen for the council is also appointed. Speaker of assembly. The speaker is elected by the assembly itself and from among its members. Usually, the speaker remains in office during the life of the assembly, and however, he vacates his office earlier in 3 cases. They are if he ceases to be a member of the assembly, or if he resigns by writing to the deputy speaker, and if he is removed by a resolution that is passed by a majority of all the then members of the assembly. And such a resolution, it should be moved, or it can be moved only after giving a 14 days advance notice. Powers and duties of the speaker. Order and decorum in the assembly. Here the speaker maintains order and decorum in the assembly for conducting its business and regulating its proceedings. And this is the primary responsibility of the speaker, and he has the final power in this regard. Final interpreter of the provisions. Here the speaker is said to be the final interpreter of the provisions of the Constitution of India, the rules of the procedure and conduct of business of assembly, and the legislative precedents within the assembly. Adjourns the assembly. The speaker adjourns the assembly or suspends the meeting in the absence of quorum. Casting vote. The speaker does not vote in the first instance, but he can exercise a casting vote in the case of a tie. He can allow a secret sitting of the house. Speaker can allow a secret sitting of the house at the request of the leader of the house. Speaker decides whether a bill is money bill or not, and his decision on the question is final. The speaker decides the question of disqualification of the member of the assembly, and he appoints the chairman of all the committees of the assembly and supervises their functioning. Deputy Speaker of Assembly. Like the speaker, the deputy speaker is also elected by the assembly itself and from among its members, and he is elected after the election of the speaker has taken place. And similar to the speaker, the deputy speaker, he remains in the office usually during the life of the assembly. And he also vacates his office earlier in 3 cases. That is, if he ceases to be a member of the assembly, or if he resigns by writing to the speaker, and if he is removed by the resolution that is passed by a majority of all the then members of the assembly. And in this case also, a resolution should be moved only after giving a 14 days notice in advance. The deputy speaker, he performs the duties of the speaker's office when it is vacant, and he also acts as a speaker when the speaker is absent from the sitting of the assembly. In both the cases, in case of deputy speaker as well as in the speaker, the deputy speaker has all the powers of speaker. The speaker nominates from among the members a panel of chairmen, and any one of them, they can preside over the assembly in the absence of speaker or the deputy speaker, and he has the same power as a speaker while presiding, and he holds the office until a new panel of chairmen is nominated. Chairman of council. The chairman, he is elected by the council itself and from among its members. The chairman vacates his office in 3 cases. If he ceases to be a member of the assembly, or if he resigns by writing to the deputy chairman, and if he is removed by a resolution that is passed by a majority of all the then members of the council. And in this case also, a resolution should be moved only after giving a 14 days advance notice. As a presiding officer, the powers and functions of the chairman in the council, they are similar to those of the speaker in the assembly. And the speaker has one special power which is not enjoyed by the chairman. And that special power is, here the speaker decides whether a bill is money bill or not, and his decision on the question is final. And this special power is not enjoyed by the presiding officer. So as in the case of speaker, the salaries and the allowances of the chairman, they are also fixed by the state legislature, and they are charged on the consolidated fund of the state, and thus they are not a subject to annual vote of the state legislature.